Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to tell a true story about a poor mechanic with big dreams of invention faces ridicule from everyone around him. Years later, his idea changes an entire industry, and his story becomes proof that vision matters more than validation. It was a humid August evening in a forgotten corner of the city. The kind where the heat clung to your skin and the air tasted faintly of engine oil. Inside a cramped garage lit by a single flickering bulb, Elias Navarro, a young mechanic with grease-stained hands and tired eyes, tightened the last bolt on an old motorbike that wasn't worth half the effort he poured into it. The garage was silent except for the soft hum of a fan struggling to stay alive. Outside, laughter drifted in from the street. The kind of laughter that wasn't light or joyful, but sharp, pointed, and aimed directly at him. Still playing inventor, Eli? You can't even afford new tools, man. Dreams don't feed you. Engines do. Stick to what you know. He heard the voices, every word clear, but he didn't look up. He couldn't, because if he did, they would see the doubt creeping into his eyes. And he refused to give them that satisfaction. Elias wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the small table in the corner of the garage. On it lay dozens of sketches, rough drawings of a machine he'd imagined since he was a boy. A compact, fuel-efficient engine that could cut emissions by half and change the way small workshops survived. Everyone told him it was impossible. Too expensive, too complicated, too big for someone like him. But when you grow up with nothing, big is the only way you learn to survive. He picked up one of the sketches, edges curled and stained by oil. "I know it can work," he whispered to himself. "I just need time and a chance." The bulb overhead flickered again, casting a soft golden glow across the room. In that moment, you could almost see the boy he once was, sitting beside his father in the same garage, watching sparks fly as metal met metal. His father used to say, "Don't let the noise of doubt drown the sound of your own ideas." Elias held on to those words now, even though his father had been gone for years. He walked to the window and looked out at the narrow street, at the men who mocked him, the neighbors who pitied him, the world that never expected anything from a poor mechanic with oil under his fingernails. Sometimes you feel the weight of your dreams pressing down so heavily that breathing becomes a quiet battle. And sometimes you look at your hands, rough, scarred, tired, and ask yourself if they're enough. But if you have ever felt that way, you'd understand what Elias felt at that window. A strange, stubborn fire, a whisper in the dark saying, "Keep going." He pushed the sketches aside and opened the toolbox. With slow, deliberate movements, he began building a prototype, using scraps, discarded parts, and faith that wasn't loud but persistent. Outside, the laughter grew louder. Inside, Elias didn't hear it anymore, because for the first time in a long time, he could hear his idea breathing. Nights passed the same way they often do for dreamers who start with nothing. Quietly, stubbornly, and without applause. The garage became Elias's world. A world lit by a single bulb, cluttered with rusted tools, and filled with the soft clinking of metal as he pieced together his vision, inch by inch. Most people slept while he worked. But for Elias, midnight was the only time the world stopped reminding him of who they believed he was. Every evening after the last customers left and the street fell into silence, he returned to his makeshift workbench. He'd roll up his sleeves, wipe his hands on the same fraying cloth, and begin again. Grinding, welding, sketching, hoping. But dreams, especially the bold ones, aren't built on hope alone. They're built on resistance, and the world seemed determined to resist him. One night, as he tested a small valve, a loud bang echoed through the garage. The prototype sputtered, coughed, and died. Smoke curled into the air. The failure hit him like a punch to the chest. He ripped off his gloves, tossed them aside, and sank to the floor. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking. "Why isn't it working?" he muttered, pressing his palms against his face. His voice cracked in that way you only hear when someone's been strong for too long. In the quiet darkness, the old doubts returned. Familiar, cruel voices that always seemed to find him when he was weakest. "Who are you kidding? You're just a mechanic. People like you don't invent things. If your idea mattered, someone else would have already made it." They weren't real voices, but they echoed with the weight of everything he'd ever been told. He stayed there, sitting on the cold floor long after the smoke cleared. Something about failure feels heavier when there's no one around to see it, when you're left alone with the truth of your exhaustion. He closed his eyes and remembered his father's hands, scarred and steady, guiding him through his first engine repair as a boy. "Dreams aren't about being believed," his father once said. "They're about being built." Elias took a long, trembling breath. Then he stood, slowly, deliberately, and walked back to the workbench. He examined the broken piece. He sketched a revision. He adjusted a component by a single millimeter. Failure hadn't defeated him. It had given him direction, but just as he returned to work, footsteps approached outside. A group of neighborhood men leaned into the doorway. One smirked, burning the midnight oil again, going to invent the future in that little box of scrap. Another added, "Come on, Eli, be realistic. You don't have the money, the education, or the connections. You're chasing smoke." Their laughter spilled into the room like cold wind. Elias didn't look up this time. His hands kept moving, tightening a bolt, adjusting a valve, quieter, sharper, steadier than before. He simply said, "Maybe you're right." For a moment, the group paused. Then Elias added softly, "But maybe you're not." The men scoffed and walked away, their footsteps fading into the night. Elias finally looked at the half-built machine before him, broken, messy, imperfect, and saw something they couldn't see: potential. Sometimes the world laughs not because your dream is foolish, but because it's too small to imagine what you're capable of. That night, Elias didn't go to sleep. He worked until dawn bled through the cracks in the garage door, until the bulb flickered one last time and went out. He didn't need its light anymore. Something inside him had started to burn brighter. The next morning arrived with a heaviness that settled deep in Elias's bones. The sun rose, pale and tired. As if it too understood the weight of beginnings, Elias stepped out of the garage, stretching his stiff shoulders. His clothes still smelled faintly of burnt metal and sleepless hours. People passed by on their way to work, men in pressed shirts, women carrying briefcases, teenagers in uniforms. They all moved with purpose, with direction. He felt invisible among them. But invisibility was something he knew well. When you start with nothing, the world doesn't just overlook you, it forgets you exist. At the small corner cafe where he bought the cheapest coffee on the menu, he overheard two regular customers whispering as he passed. That Navarro boy, still stuck in that garage. Poor kid wasting his life on pipe dreams. He lowered his head, pretending he didn't hear, but their words clung to him like dust. Back at the garage, he opened the metal shutter and froze. His project, was more than an engine piece. It was every night he'd stayed up, every sacrifice, every dream no one believed in. He closed his eyes. "Is it really worth it?" he whispered. And in the silence, something inside him whispered back, "Yes," not loudly, not confidently, just honestly. He gathered the pieces one by one, placing them gently on the table. Even broken, he treated them with the care of something sacred. Dreams don't die when people laugh at them. They die when you stop tending to them. As he worked, hands steady, despite the exhaustion, a small voice startled him from the doorway. "Excuse me, are you Elias Navarro?" He looked up. A young engineering student, barely in his 20s, he stood in the entrance holding a tattered notebook. His clothes were worn, and his backpack looked like it had survived more failures than success. I heard you were trying to build something new," the student said shyly. "Something efficient, something different. I've been trying to do the same." Elias blinked. "Someone sent you?" "Not exactly," the student replied. "People laugh at me too, so I figured maybe I'd find someone who understands." For a moment, Elias didn't know what to say. He'd spent years believing he was alone, the only one foolish enough to dream inside a tiny garage, surrounded by people who mocked ambition. But here, standing at his doorway, was proof he wasn't. Elias stepped aside and gestured toward the workbench. "Come in," he said quietly, "and if you don't mind the mess." The young man smiled, relief washing over his face. "I don't mind. Mess usually means something's being built." Elias felt something shift, a small, subtle change. Not hope, not triumph, but connection. And sometimes the smallest connection is the first crack in the wall that keeps you from seeing what's possible. Together they examined the pieces scattered on the table. Elias explained his design, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. The student listened with wide eyes, nodding, adding small suggestions, sketching ideas in the margins of his notebook. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. For the first time, Elias wasn't just a poor mechanic with a dream. He was a builder sharing a blueprint, a creator speaking to another creator. And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the young student looked at him and said words Elias had never heard from anyone before. "You're onto something, don't stop." Elias felt his chest tighten, the sting of tears threatening, not from sadness, but from the shock of being believed in. In a world full of doubt, sometimes all it takes is one voice saying, "I see what you're trying to do." And that night, for the first time in months, Elias didn't feel alone. He felt possible. It happened on a night that didn't feel special at all. No stars, no moon, just the hum of the old ceiling fan spinning above Mateo's head as he sat alone in his workshop. The same workshop everyone said was a waste of time. The clock on the wall ticked with a stubborn rhythm, as if mocking how little progress he felt he had made. Every screw on the table, every scattered blueprint, every half-finished prototype felt like a reminder of how far he still was from the future he imagined. And yet, there was a strange calm inside him, almost as if life had gone quiet enough for him to finally hear himself. He leaned back, staring at the metal frame of the machine he'd worked on for years, an early prototype of a low-cost, energy-efficient engine design he once believed could change everything. People had laughed at it, laughed at him. A mechanic with an invention? Don't embarrass yourself, Mateo. Real engineers spend years in universities, not greasy workshops. You're dreaming too loud for someone who has nothing. All those voices. Yet tonight, none of them mattered. For the first time, he wasn't fighting the noise around him. only the silence within him. He closed his eyes and let himself remember. The day his father placed an old wrench in his hand. The day he repaired his first engine alone. The day he sketched the first design of the invention on a crumpled sheet of paper. The day he promised himself, like silently, fiercely, that he would build something that mattered. And in that dark, quiet room, a realization slowly rose inside him. It had never been about proving them wrong. It had always been about proving to himself that he wasn't foolish for believing. He opened his eyes, looked at the blueprint, looked at the engine, and for the first time in months, he whispered to himself, "I can still finish this." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. A small flame rekindled in him, the kind that doesn't make noise, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that keeps a person alive. He stood up, wiped the dust from the metal surface, tightened a bolt, adjusted a gear, and suddenly, without warning, his prototype gave a soft, mechanical sigh. The first sign that the new modification just might work. Matteo froze. Then he laughed, a quiet, shaky, unbelieving laugh. Not the laughter of someone who had won, but the laughter of someone who finally felt possible again. In that tiny workshop, in the middle of the night, with no witnesses and no applause. The world finally went silent enough for a dream to breathe, and the man everyone doubted took his first real step toward the future waiting for him. The next morning arrived quietly, almost cautiously. A pale ribbon of sunlight slipped through the cracked window of Matteo's workshop, landing across the metal frame of the prototype he had worked on all night. Dust motes drifted in the warm beam, turning the room into something sacred, like a place where forgotten dreams came back to life. Matteo hadn't slept, not even for a moment. His hands were stained with grease, his eyes red from concentration, but there was something alive in him, something that hadn't lived there in years. He approached the machine slowly, as though afraid to break the fragile hope forming inside him. Every gear, every wire, every bolt seemed to hum with potential. All he needed was to turn the switch, but something stopped him. Not fear of failure. He had failed more times than he could count. Not exhaustion. That had become a companion long ago. No. It was something deeper. A quiet, trembling awareness that if this worked, if this actually worked, his entire life would change. And change, even good change, is terrifying when you've lived too long in the familiar darkness. He exhaled shakily and placed his hand on the switch. If it fails, I'll fix it. If it works, I'll fight for it. Then he flipped it. For a moment, nothing. Just a click. A pause. A single heartbeat of silence. Then, a soft, controlled whir echoed through the workshop. Soft at first, then steadier, then smoother. The sound of something working exactly the way it was meant to. Matteo's breath caught in his throat. His engine, was running, not sputtering, not stalling, running. For the first time since he was a 19-year-old dreamer drawing blueprints on the back of receipts, his invention had taken its first real breath. Matteo didn't cheer. He didn't jump. He didn't shout. He simply placed a hand over his mouth and let the tears fall. Quiet, overwhelming, grateful tears. Outside, the town began to wake. People walked past his workshop the same way they always did, unaware that behind that old, rusted door, a miracle, a small, mechanical miracle, was happening. And as the machine hummed steadily before him, he realized something profound. It didn't matter who laughed. It didn't matter who doubted him. It didn't matter who thought he wasn't enough. Because in this moment, this moment that belonged only to him. Mateo had built something that no one else could. Something born from late nights, quiet courage, relentless belief, and years of working in silence while the world dismissed him. He wiped his face, steadied his breath, and whispered, "It's time the world sees what they tried to bury." And that was when the knock came at the door. Sharp, unexpected, and perfectly timed, as if destiny itself had decided it was time for the next chapter to begin. The knock echoed again, louder this time, urgent enough to break the trance of the humming engine. Mateo wiped the last tear from his cheek, straightened his back, and walked toward the door. For a moment he hesitated, wondering who in the world would come this early. The neighbors rarely visited. Most only came when they needed their cars fixed, not to check on him. He opened the door slowly. Standing on the other side was Lucas, the young man whose old motorcycle had been sitting in the corner of the workshop for weeks. He had always been polite, but he was like everyone else in town, convinced Mateo was wasting his life chasing impossible dreams. Lucas's eyes scanned Mateo's tired face, then drifted past him, to the soft, steady hum filling the room. "Is that my bike?" he asked. Mateo shook his head. "No, it's something else." Lucas stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. His expression shifted the moment he saw the machine. His brows dropped. His mouth opened slightly. He didn't move closer. He just stared, as if he couldn't understand what he was seeing. "Did you build that?" Mateo nodded once. "And it works?" Another nod. Lucas released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He walked around the machine, cautious but amazed, like someone studying a living creature they had heard rumors about but never believed existed. "What is it?" he finally asked. Mateo hesitated, not out of secrecy but out of disbelief that someone was genuinely interested. "It's a low-emission micro-engine," he said quietly. "Lighter, stronger, cleaner, and easier to maintain than anything being used right now." Lucas blinked. "So, something like this doesn't exist?" "No," Mateo whispered. "Not yet." There was a long, heavy silence. Then Lucas turned toward him. And for the first time in years, Mateo saw something in someone's eyes that he hadn't seen directed at him in a very long time. Respect, not pity. Not mockery, not disbelief. Respect. "Mateo," Lucas said slowly, "this could change everything." Hearing someone else say the words he had kept buried in his own chest for years made Mateo's heart tighten. His throat felt thick. His fingers trembled slightly at his sides. Lucas continued, excitement rising in his voice. "You need to show this to people, investors, engineers. Someone has to see this." Mateo looked at him, really looked at him. Because for so long he had lived in a world where no one believed in him, a world where he had to carry the weight of his dreams alone. A world where every step was uphill and every voice echoed with doubt. Now suddenly the world felt just a little bit different, not because everyone believed, not because everyone understood, but because someone finally did. Before he could respond, Lucas's expression changed again, this time into something almost nervous. "Can I tell someone about it?" he asked. "Someone who might actually know what this means?" Mateo felt the ground shift beneath him. Not physically, but emotionally, like the moment right before a door opens that you've been waiting to step through your entire life. He thought about the years of ridicule, the whispered insults, the jokes made at his expense, the nights he fixed cars for pennies just to buy gears for machines no one believed in. And yet, here he was now, with a machine that worked, and someone willing to open a door. Matteo nodded. "Tell them," he said. "Tell anyone who'll listen." Lucas smiled, and not mockingly, not out of politeness, but out of genuine excitement. "Matteo," he said, "you're onto something huge." As Lucas rushed out the door, barely containing his enthusiasm, Matteo stood alone again in the quiet workshop. But it didn't feel lonely anymore, because for the first time in his life, the world was beginning to turn its head toward him. The workshop felt strangely alive after Lucas sprinted out. The humming engine wasn't just a sound anymore, it felt like a heartbeat, a promise, a warning, a beginning. Matteo stood there for a long moment, hands still trembling slightly, letting the reality settle in his chest. After years of working alone, of chasing an idea that everyone called pointless, he could feel it. A door had cracked open. But cracks, as he knew too well, could close just as quickly. He turned off the engine and sat on a small wooden stool by his workbench. His thoughts were racing, too fast to hold. Excitement blended with fear, hope tangled with doubt. What if they laugh? What if they say it's nothing? What if the world sees me the same way this town always has? He closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. Dreams were heavy, heavier than people realized. Carrying on for so many years took a toll no one else could see. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the day brightened. Voices of passing neighbors drifted faintly through the thin walls. A dog barked in the distance. Life went on, unaware that things had quietly shifted. Then, hours later, footsteps approached again. Not one pair this time, but several. Matteo felt his breath catch. The workshop door opened slowly. He stepped in, breathless, ready, energized by what Matteo had never seen. A woman walked along in her early 40s, wearing a navy blue blazer and carrying a small leather notebook. Her eyes scanned the workshop with sharp, observant precision. She wasn't from this town. That was obvious from her posture alone. "Matteo," Lucas said, "this is Engineer Sophia Reyes." The name hit him like a cold gust of wind. He knew that name. Everyone in the industry knew it. The woman whose designs had reshaped half the electric motor market. The woman whose TED Talk he had watched at least a dozen times. The woman whose patents were studied like scripture in engineering circles. And somehow, she was standing inside his workshop. "Lucas told me you built something interesting," she said as her voice calm, steady, naturally authoritative. "May I see it?" Matteo's mouth felt dry, but he nodded. He stepped aside, revealing the machine. Engineer Reyes approached it slowly, not with skepticism, but with a focus that made the room feel smaller, the air thicker. She circled it once, twice, kneeling to examine the components, gently brushing her fingers across the metal, studying every angle. No one spoke. Lucas stood near the door, watching anxiously. Matteo waited, heart pounding in his throat. Finally, she looked up. "Turn it on." His hands shook slightly as he powered up the engine. The soft whir filled the workshop again. So clean, so smooth, so impossibly stable for something built by a man working alone with scrap parts. She listened carefully, leaning closer, watching the movement of the pistons, the rotation of the flywheel, the subtle vibration. Then she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a curious smile, a real impressed smile. "Matteo," she said softly, "do you know what you built?" He swallowed. "A micro-engine." "No," she replied, "you've built a breakthrough." His chest tightened. His knees almost buckled. "This design shouldn't be this efficient," she continued, pointing at one part after another. "This weight-to-output ratio is unheard of. And the stabilization system, how did you even think of this configuration? Mateo blinked at her, stunned. It just made sense. She stood up slowly, studying him now, the way a person examines someone who has no idea how extraordinary they are. People will try to take this from you, she said. People will say you don't belong in the room. People will underestimate you. Her eyes locked onto his, but I won't. Mateo felt something warm, almost painful, spread through his chest. Belief. Genuine belief. I want to help you, she said, but you must understand. Once we step forward, everything changes. Your name, your work, your life. He looked at her, then at the machine, then at his grease-stained hands, hands that had held dreams too fragile for the world. Are you ready? She asked. Mateo inhaled slowly for the first time in his life. He felt ready. Yes, he said, I'm ready. And with that, the door didn't just crack open, it swung wide. For a long moment, Mateo just stood there, the hum of the engine behind him, the weight of Alden's words before him, and years of buried dreams rising all at once like a tide he could no longer hold back. No one had ever said something like that to him. Not his old co-workers, not the neighbors who snickered when he walked by, not even his family who loved him but had long accepted that his life would be small and ordinary. But now, in this cramped workshop with oil-stained floors and rusted shelves, a man who shaped innovations for a living stood before him saying, "Your invention could change the world." Mateo's hands shook. He flicked the switch, turning the engine off. Silence settled over the room. A thick, heavy silence filled with possibility. Alden moved closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me how you built it." Mateo hesitated, not out of secrecy, for he had no desire to hide anything, but because he wasn't sure how to explain years of trial and error, frustrations, failures, and flashes of inspiration that seemed to arrive only when he was on the edge of giving up. He pointed to the device. "It started with a problem I kept seeing," he began quietly. "Engines were powerful but wasteful. Clean energy was possible but expensive. I wanted something that could bridge the gap. Something efficient enough for the world, affordable enough for people like me." Alden listened with a focus that made Mateo's voice steady. "I spent years tearing apart old engines, rebuilding them, studying airflow, mixing designs, testing everything I could get my hands on. I failed hundreds of times, maybe more." Lucas stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching the exchange with something close to pride. Alden asked, "And the final breakthrough?" Mateo pointed to a small component near the base, a part so simple most professionals would overlook it. "This valve," he said. "I adjusted it wrong one night, accidentally really, and the entire airflow changed. It fixed a problem I'd been fighting for months." Alden bent down again, examining the part. "That mistake," Mateo added softly, "was the moment everything finally worked." Alden laughed under his breath, amazed. "You reinvented the system with scrap metal and instinct." "I reinvented it with persistence," Mateo corrected quietly. Alden straightened. His expression shifted, becoming serious, almost formal. "Mateo, I want to take this back to the city. Not to claim it, not to steal it, but to show it to the right people, investors, engineers, scientists. They need to see what you've created." Mateo felt his heartbeat quicken. "And if they don't believe it?" Alden shook his head. "They will, and if they don't, I'll make them." The words sank deep, deeper than he expected, because for the first time in a lifetime of mockery and dismissals, someone was willing to fight with him, someone who wasn't laughing, someone who wasn't waiting for him to fail. Mateo looked at Lucas, the young man who had started all of this with a simple knock on the door. "You trust him?" Matteo asked quietly. Lucas nodded without hesitation. "With my life." Alden extended his hand again, offering not just help, but something Matteo had never truly experienced. A chance, a real chance. "We can set up a demonstration," Alden said, "a meeting, a team. This is bigger than a workshop. It's bigger than all of us, but it begins with you saying yes." Matteo's breath trembled. He imagined the nights he spent alone, surrounded by parts the world had thrown away. He imagined the voices that told him he was foolish, unrealistic, delusional. He imagined every door that had never opened for him. And then he imagined a future he had been too afraid to picture. Slowly, deliberately, he shook Alden's hand. "Yes," he whispered, "let's bring it to the world." Alden smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile, and the moment felt larger than the room, larger than the town, larger than every smallness Matteo had ever lived through. For the first time in his life, he wasn't building alone. This was the beginning of something far greater. The beginning of a journey no amount of laughter could ever stop. That night, after Alden and Lucas left, the workshop felt strangely different. Not larger, not brighter, but alive. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for tomorrow to arrive, Matteo stood in the center of the room, staring at the machine that had consumed years of his life. The quiet hum still echoed in his bones, even though the engine was now silent. He placed a hand on the metal casing. All this time, this invention had been his secret world. The one place where mockery couldn't reach him, where failure was just another step, where he wasn't the poor mechanic people dismissed. But now it was no longer just his. Tomorrow people would see it, judge it, study it, decide if it mattered. And that thought shook him more than any night of failure ever had he reached for the lights, but paused when his reflection in the window caught his eye. A tired man with rough hands and a face shaped by years of struggle, a man who had never been invited into rooms where futures were decided. "What if I don't belong there?" The whisper came from a place deep inside his beloved, a place forged by years of rejection. What if they laugh again? What if this is all a mistake? He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, grounding himself. Then he remembered something he rarely let himself think about his father. A man who used to say, "It's not the dream that's too big, it's the fear." Matteo inhaled deeply. Fear had stolen enough years from him it wouldn't steal the next one. The next morning came quicker than he expected. At dawn, Lucas knocked again, but this time he wasn't alone. He stood beside Matteo like a brother guarding something sacred. They loaded the engine carefully onto the back of a small truck Alden had arranged. The sun had barely risen. The birds had barely begun. But the moment felt like something from a different lifetime. A new beginning disguised in the clothes of an ordinary morning. As they drove toward the city, Matteo sat beside his invention, hand resting on the crate, feeling the vibration of the road beneath him. He leaned his head back and let the wind hit his face. He thought about the people who would be in that meeting room. Engineers with degrees he had never been able to afford. Investors with suits worth more than his entire workshop. Scientists with knowledge he'd only learned through trial, error, and long nights of stubborn belief. And then there was him, the man who came from nothing, the man they laughed at, the man who built something they said he never could. That thought didn't intimidate him anymore. It strengthened him because he finally understood something life had been trying to teach him for years. Sometimes the world doesn't give you validation first, it gives you resistance to see whether you're truly ready. Lucas glanced over. "You nervous?" he asked. Mateo smiled quietly. "Terrified?" Lucas laughed. "Good. Means you're about to do something big." They continued driving. The city skyline appeared in the distance, tall, shining. Indifferent to the smallness of anyone's past, Mateo stared at it, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope swirl in his chest. He whispered to himself, "Let them see it. Let them see what they tried to bury." The truck rolled forward, steady and determined, and in that moment Mateo felt something powerful inside him, not confidence, something deeper, readiness. He wasn't the man they laughed at anymore. He wasn't the dreamer fixing cars just to buy scraps. He wasn't the forgotten mechanic in a forgotten workshop. He was the man who built the future they said he could never touch. And he was ready to walk into that room, whatever awaited him, whatever came next. He would face it without fear. Because destiny wasn't knocking on his door anymore, he was moving toward it. The truck slowed as they entered the city. A world of towering glass, clean streets, and people who walked with purpose. A world Mateo had always viewed from afar, like a place meant for someone else. But today, he wasn't watching it. He was entering it. Lucas guided the truck toward a sleek building made of steel and mirrored windows. It looked nothing like the dusty workshop Mateo had grown up in. This place felt like the future, and he was about to walk straight into it. Alden stood outside, waving them in. "You're right on time," he said with a grin, but then he looked directly at Mateo. "Are you ready?" Mateo swallowed, feeling his pulse beating hard beneath his skin. "I hope so." Alden nodded. "Then that's enough." They wheeled the covered machine inside on a rolling platform. Every hallway they passed felt like a tunnel leading deeper into a different life, one filled with bright lights, polished floors, and people in suits who glanced their way with curiosity. Lucas whispered softly, "They're looking at you like you're important." Mateo smiled nervously. "Feels strange. You'll get used to it." When they reached a large set of double doors, Alden paused. Behind those doors were the people who decided what inventions lived or died, people who weren't impressed easily, people who had seen 1,000 ideas and rejected 999 of them. For the first time since leaving the workshop, Mateo felt something heavy press against his chest. What if they don't believe me? What if I mess up? What if their laughter returns stronger than before? Alden saw it in his face. He placed a firm hand on Mateo's shoulder. "Listen," he said softly. "They are not better than you. They just had opportunities you never got. But today you walk into this room with something they don't have." "What's that?" Mateo whispered. "Proof," Alden said. And with that, he pushed the doors open. The room was enormous, with rows of seats and a long table at the front where 5 board members sat. Scientists and engineers filled the chairs behind them. Someone whispered as Mateo entered, "That's him, the mechanic." The word mechanic used to feel small, like an anchor dragging him down, but now it felt like part of his strength. He stepped forward slowly, eyes scanning the room. The board members watched him with calm, unreadable expressions. Alden lifted the cover from the machine. Gasps spread across the room. Mateo didn't say anything yet. He simply placed his hand on the switch, and the silence became so deep, so complete, that he could hear his own heartbeat. In that silence, he remembered the laughter, the nights of failure, the voices that told him he would never be enough. Then he remembered something stronger, and something that rose inside his chest like a flame refusing to go out. "I built this no matter what happens next. I built this. He flipped the switch. The machine came to life instantly. A smooth, steady hum filled the room, stronger than before, as if it knew it was being tested, as if it understood that this was its moment too. Every eye widened, every quiet skepticism shattered. One of the board members leaned forward, whispering, "That efficiency, impossible unless..." Another stood up. "What is the fuel ratio? How is this airflow stabilize?" A professor shook her head. "This design shouldn't work, but it does." Alden smiled at the reactions, but he stayed silent. This moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to Matteo. Matteo stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "I know what it looks like," he began. "I know you think something like this shouldn't exist, but I didn't build it with rules. I built it with necessity." The room quieted. "I built it because I grew up fixing machines that were never designed for people like us. People who couldn't afford anything better. I built it for small workshops, for small towns, for anyone who needed more but could only pay for less." He pointed to the engine. "This isn't a miracle. It's the result of failing again and again until failing wasn't possible anymore." One of the engineers near the front spoke, voice trembling with excitement. "Matteo, do you understand what this means?" Matteo inhaled slowly. "For the first time," he said softly, "I do." The room went silent again, but not the kind of silence that follows disbelief, the kind that follows recognition, respect, possibility. Alden turned to the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man's invention could change the industry." The head of the board stood up slowly. "We need to test this immediately," she said. "And if the numbers match what we're seeing here, then the world is about to meet a revolutionary new technology." Matteo felt his knees weaken. Lucas placed a steady hand on his back. "You did it," he whispered. Matteo shook his head, eyes filling. "No," he replied, voice breaking into a quiet, emotional whisper. "I'm finally being heard." The applause began softly, just a few hands at first. Then the entire room erupted, not for Alden, not for the machine, for him, for the man they once laughed at. And in that roar of recognition, Matteo felt the weight he had carried for so many years finally begin to lift. He had walked into the room as the man they underestimated. He would walk out as the man they could never ignore again. The applause echoed long after it stopped, not just in the room, but inside Matteo's chest. For years, he had learned to live without sound, without praise, without validation, without the comfort of being seen. But now the room trembled with recognition, and it felt unreal. Alden guided him gently toward a smaller side room reserved for private meetings. The lights were softer there, the atmosphere calmer, but the tremor in Matteo's hands refused to steady. Lucas followed close behind, practically glowing with pride. When the door closed, Alden exhaled deeply. "Matteo, you just made history in there." Matteo sank slowly into a chair. "I didn't think they would react like that." Alden laughed softly. "Neither did they." Lucas leaned forward. "They didn't clap for the machine," he said. "They clapped for you." Matteo swallowed hard. "I'm not used to that." "You will be," Lucas replied. A knock suddenly sounded at the door. Alden opened it to reveal two members of the board, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a clipboard, and a younger man carrying a folder thick with documents. "Mr. Alvarez," the woman said, "we'd like to speak with you about next steps." Matteo straightened, nerves tightening again. The woman stepped inside, offering a professional but warm smile. "Your engine," she began, "has the potential to lead a new generation of affordable, clean energy technology. We would like to begin a partnership, Renagrer. Full testing, development, a patent, and eventual manufacturing. Mateo blinked, unsure he heard correctly. A partnership? The younger man nodded. With you as the inventor, your name on the patent, your guidance in every step of scaling the design. Mateo felt the world slow his name on a patent, on something real, on something that mattered. He rubbed his hands together without realizing it, a nervous habit he developed on long nights spent fixing broken engines for people who would never remember his face. But, he whispered, I didn't go to university, I don't have the training, I don't have... The woman held up a hand. You have the invention, she said firmly. The rest, we can teach. Alden nodded toward him. Let them help you carry the weight now. For a moment, Mateo couldn't speak. He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone in the workshop, surrounded by silence and self-doubt. He thought of the people who laughed at him, the ones who said he had no future, the ones who believed dreams were toys for the privileged. He thought of the man he once was, the man who worked quietly, invisibly, believing the world had no place for someone like him. And then he thought of now, of this room, of the machine humming proudly behind the wall, of the hands extended toward him, hands offering partnership, not pity, hands offering a chance he had fought for all his life without even knowing it. He inhaled shakily. What do you need from me? He asked. The woman placed the folder gently in front of him. Your signature, she said, and your belief. Mateo stared at the folder. His name was printed on the first page. Mateo Alvarez, lead inventor and design originator. Something inside him broke loose, not in pain, but in release. The weight of the past slipped from his shoulders like an old coat he finally outgrew. I'll do it, he whispered. His voice wasn't shaky this time. It was steady, rooted, ready. The woman smiled. Then, Mr. Alvarez, welcome to the future you created. Lucas let out a breath he'd been holding for minutes. Mateo, you did it. No, Mateo said quietly, eyes lifting toward them with a calm he hadn't felt in years. I'm just getting started. When they stepped out of the room, the hallway was waiting for them, not with laughter, not with judgment, but with respect. Scientists approached him with questions, engineers wanted to shake his hand, a reporter stood by hoping for a quote. For the first time in his life, the world wasn't walking past him, it was turning toward him. And as he walked through the hallway, through the noise, the excitement, the new beginnings, one thing echoed louder than the rest. This is what happens when the person they loved refuses to stop building. It wasn't he was the man who created something they never could. He was the man who believed in a dream long before the world did, and now the world had no choice but to believe too. The reporters gathered around him, but Alden gently stepped in front. One at a time, sir, he said. He's had a long day. But even then, dozens of eyes still looked at Mateo with admiration, the kind of admiration he'd only ever seen from afar, never directed at himself. He felt overwhelmed but not scared, not anymore. Lucas walked beside him, practically electric with joy. Mateo, can you believe this? They want you, your mind, your invention. Mateo shook his head slowly. It still feels like I might wake up in the workshop. Lucas smiled. Then it'll be the best dream you ever had. As they reached the end of the hallway, a familiar face stopped him in his tracks. A man he hadn't expected. A man he hadn't seen in years. Mateo's former boss. The one who fired him when he fell behind. watching Mateo with an expression that betrayed a mixture of disbelief, regret, and something else that looked almost like shame. The man cleared his throat. "Mateo, I saw the presentation." Mateo stayed quiet. The man shifted awkwardly. "I didn't know you were capable of something like that." Lucas stepped forward, protective. He always was. The former boss ignored him, eyes locked on Mateo. "If I had known..." Mateo raised a hand, gently stopping him. "You didn't need to know," he said softly. "You weren't supposed to." The man blinked. "I don't understand." Mateo took a slow breath. "For years I thought people like you had the power to decide what I was worth. I thought your opinion was the limit of my future." His voice didn't waver. "But now I know my worth was never in your hands. It was in mine." The hallway seemed to hold its breath. The man swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Mateo nodded politely. Not out of bitterness, but out of closure. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "But I don't owe my dream an apology anymore either." The man lowered his head. "If you ever..." "No," Mateo said gently. "I'm not going back. I'm moving forward." And with that, he walked past the person who once tried to define him, past the doubt, past the smallness, past the world that tried to confine him. And when the doors slid open to reveal the outside, the sun blazing across the sky, it felt symbolic, like the universe itself was saying, "This is where your real story begins." As they stepped outside, Lucas nudged him. "How do you feel?" Mateo looked up at the sky, the light warm on his face. "Like I spent years surviving in the dark," he whispered. "And now, I finally found the switch." Lucas smiled. "And what now?" Mateo turned toward the city, a place that once felt too big for him. "Now," he said, "now I build something that helps people who grew up like me, the ones no one believed in." Lucas grinned. "So this is your first day as inventor Mateo Alvarez, huh?" Mateo chuckled. "No." He stepped forward, the wind brushing against him like a welcome. "This is my first day as the man I was always meant to be." For a while, it felt like everything was finally moving the way he had always dreamed. Partnerships formed. New engineers joined his small team. And for the first time in his life, Mateo walked into a workshop that didn't smell of leaking fuel or cracked metal, but of possibility. Yet, as life often does, the true test arrived quietly as sea. Then all at once it started on an evening thick with the hum of machines. The workshop lights glowed warm orange against the windows as the sun set. His team had gathered around the prototype, the final perfected version of his clean energy system. This was the one investors were waiting to see, the one that would determine whether their funding tripled or vanished. Lucas adjusted a valve. "Everything's aligned. This is it, Hermano." Mateo nodded, steadying his breath. "Let's activate it." The machine hummed to life. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. Then a sharp crack broke the harmony. A thin plume of smoke curled upward. Lights flickered. Two of the younger engineers stepped back in panic. "Power surge!" one shouted. Mateo rushed in and killed the system before the damage spread, but the room was already filled with that old, familiar scent of burnt wiring, a scent that stabbed him with memories of failure he thought he'd outgrown. His heart slammed against his ribs. "What happened?" Lucas asked. Mateo didn't answer. Couldn't. He was too busy staring at the machine, his machine, wounded and silent in front of him. The lead engineer, Maria, cleared her throat gently. "We'll diagnose it, Mateo. It might be a simple overload." But her voice sounded distant, muffled beneath the roar of panic rising inside him, because he'd been here before at small garage tables, at borrowed workshops, at midnight alone with broken devices in front of him, and calibrate, just fix engines. It's all you'll ever be good at. And even now, after everything he had built, everything he had proven, those old ghosts pushed against the door of his mind, trying to force their way back in. Maria stepped closer. "Matteo, are you okay?" He forced a nod, but even that felt hollow. That night, long after the team left, Matteo stayed in the workshop alone. The overhead lights buzzed. Tools lay scattered across a table. Silence hung heavy, pressing on his chest. He touched the damaged panel gently, as if comforting a wounded friend. "You're not supposed to fail," he whispered without realizing it. "You're supposed to work. Just this once. Just work." His eyes burned, because it wasn't really the machine he was talking to, it was himself. His reflection in the metal surface looked tired, older somehow. A man caught between the weight of responsibility and the fear of becoming the disappointment he once believed he was. And in that quiet, the truth hit him. He wasn't afraid of the machine failing. He was afraid of proving his doubters right. He sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "You survived worse than this," he told himself. "You survived poverty, humiliation, being underestimated, working alone." But doubt still clenched his chest like a fist. Outside, the city glow pulsed through the workshop windows, a reminder that people were waiting. Investors, engineers, the world, and that for the first time in his life, he wasn't the only one who could get hurt if he failed. That responsibility felt heavier than any engine he'd ever lifted. Hours passed. Finally, Lucas appeared at the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I knew you wouldn't go home," he said softly. "You never do when it matters." Matteo didn't lift his head. "I can't let them down." Lucas pulled up a chair. "You're not letting anyone down." Matteo shook his head. "If this fails, it won't just be my dream that collapses. Other people trusted me. They believed in me." Lucas leaned forward, eyes steady. "Matteo, listen to me. The world didn't change because you built a perfect machine. It changed because you dared to believe you could build one." Matteo looked at him, eyes tired. "That belief is what people follow," Lucas continued. "Not the machine, you." The words pierced something deep inside, and slowly, the panic softened. Breath by breath, the heaviness lifted just enough for him to feel the floor beneath his feet again. Lucas nudged him lightly. "Come on, let's fix this thing. You and me, like always." Matteo looked at the machine one more time. Then he stood. Not because he was confident, not because he was fearless, but because he remembered something. A visionary isn't someone who never fails. A visionary is someone who doesn't stop when failure comes. And with that truth settling into his bones, he picked up his tools and began again. The workshop was quiet except for the soft clinking of tools and the steady rhythm of Lucas humming under his breath. An old habit from their childhood, meant to keep the mind calm when hands were busy. Matteo stood over the opened panel of the prototype, wires spread out like veins, circuits exposed like the inner workings of a heart. He moved slowly, carefully, examining each connection, each line of code, each possibility. Lucas pointed to a section of the motherboard. "Everything looks clean here. If it were just an overload, the breakers would have tripped before this much damage happened." Matteo nodded softly, which means something upstream pushed past the safety limit. Someone could have miscalculated the calibration. Matteo shook his head. No, the team triple-checked their values. He pulled out a thin magnifier lens and leaned closer. Then he froze. A thin, almost invisible burn mark traced along a tiny copper path. Not random, not accidental. It looked precise, surgical. His heart thudded. Lucas frowned. "What is it?" Mateo didn't answer. "Not yet." He traced the burn with the tip of a small probe. The damage wasn't caused by overheating. It was caused by a forced surge, a manual override that bypassed the machine's safety limit entirely. His breath caught. "This wasn't a malfunction," he whispered. "This was done on purpose." Lucas stiffened. "By who?" Mateo stood slowly, pieces falling into place in his mind. The timing, the sabotage-level precision, the access required to reach that circuit, the confidence someone had that he wouldn't detect it, someone who wanted the demo to fail, someone who wanted to prove he didn't belong among innovators and engineers, someone who stood to gain if he fell back into obscurity. He felt a sting deep in his chest, not fear, not anger, but heartbreak. Maria stepped into the workshop just then, carrying a folder of diagnostic readings. "You two are still here?" she said, then noticed the expression on Mateo's face. "What's wrong? Did you find something?" Mateo handed her the magnifier. Her eyes widened. This was intentional. The room went silent. Lucas leaned against the table, jaw tight. So someone in the building, someone with access, wanted you to fail tonight. Maria swallowed. "Do you want me to pull the entry logs from the security system?" Mateo didn't answer right away. He felt something shift inside him, a deep, aching mix of disappointment and clarity. Then he closed the prototype gently, almost tenderly. "No," he said quietly. Lucas stared at him. "Mateo, someone sabotaged your life's work. Don't you want to know who?" He shook his head. "Whoever did this," Mateo said, "wasn't trying to destroy the machine. They were trying to destroy me." The words felt heavy, but true. "And knowing their name won't change anything," he continued. "It won't fix this. It won't move us forward." Maria stepped closer. "Then what do we do?" Mateo exhaled slowly, and for the first time since the explosion of sparks, his voice carried strength again. "We repair it," he said. "We rebuild it stronger than before. We redesign the safety system so no one can ever force that kind of surge again." He tapped the metal casing of the prototype. "And when this machine stands on its own, not despite the sabotage, but because of how we rebuilt it, that will be our answer." Lucas's eyes softened. "You're sure?" Mateo nodded. "You can't fight darkness by naming it," he said. "You fight it by turning on more light." A quiet respect settled between them. Then Maria asked, "Do you want the team to come back tomorrow?" Mateo shook his head gently. "No, this part I need to do alone." Maria accepted that with a small nod. Lucas placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you need, hermano, we're here." When they finally left, the workshop became something else. Not just a room filled with wires and tools, but a sanctuary. A place where a man who'd spent his entire life underestimated could turn silence into power. He put on his gloves, rolled up his sleeves, and began to rebuild the machine piece by piece. Hour after hour slipped by. Sometimes he paused just to breathe, just to think, just to remind himself of how far he'd come, from a boy in a dusty little garage to a man working on a machine that could change the world. And somewhere in the middle of that long, quiet night, something shifted. The fear lifted. The doubt faded. The weight turned into determination, because sabotage wasn't proof that he didn't belong. Sabotage was proof that someone was finally afraid of what he was becoming. Morning light slowly crept into the workshop, casting a warm glow across his finished work. The machine stood restored, stronger, cleaner, smarter. So was he. The morning sun stretched across the workshop floor, turning metal edges into gold. Matteo stood in front of the machine, Iridurus. The version he rebuilt with his own hands without fear, without hesitation, without needing to prove anything to anyone except himself. He touched the polished casing one last time. "You're ready," he whispered. But he wasn't talking to the machine, he was talking to the man staring back at him in its reflection. A few hours later, the investors, engineers, journalists, and collaborators gathered in the main presentation hall, a room buzzing with energy, anticipation, and whispers. Maria stood at the technical station, exchanging a reassuring glance with Lucas, who practically radiated nervous excitement. "Think he's okay?" Maria asked. Lucas smiled softly. "He's more than okay, you'll see." The lights dimmed, cameras clicked into position, eyes turned toward the entrance, and then Matteo walked in. Not rushing, not fidgeting, not shrinking into himself the way the world once trained him to. He walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived storms invisible to the audience before him, someone who rebuilt himself from broken parts. Someone who had already met his worst fears in the dark and defeated them. He stepped onto the stage. A hush fell over the room, and for the first time in his life, Matteo didn't look intimidated by the rows of intellectuals, innovators, and business leaders in front of him. He looked like he belonged there. He began with a simple sentence. "Last night, I learned something important." People leaned in, expecting a technical explanation or a dramatic announcement, but that wasn't what he had brought with him today. "I learned that innovations fail sometimes," he continued, "not because the idea is flawed, but because the world isn't always ready for them." Lucas watched him, eyes slightly wide. He hadn't expected Matteo to share something so personal. Neither had the audience. "But failure," Matteo said, "isn't a sign that you're not enough. Sometimes it's proof that you're doing something worth stopping." A soft ripple of murmurs swept across the room. Maria nodded to herself, understanding exactly what he meant. Matteo took a breath, pressed a button on the console beside him. The machine powered on, but not with a violent hum or a burst of sparks. It awakened smoothly, a soft rising glow pulsing through its core like a heartbeat steady and sure. And the entire hall gasped. Because this version didn't just work, it worked flawlessly. The display screens lit with clean energy readings, heat levels stable, output efficiency far beyond industry standards, no instability, no flickering, no alarms, just pure, graceful execution. Matteo stepped aside, letting the data speak for him. "This," he said softly, "is what happens when you rebuild without fear." The crowd erupted in applause, and not polite, not measured, but explosive. Lucas cheered louder than anyone, pumping both fists in the air. Maria wiped a tear that she quickly pretended didn't exist. But the moment wasn't over yet, because as the applause faded, a man in the front row stood, a man no one expected to see, overwhelmed. One of the top investors, known for being harsh, skeptical, practically unshakable, he adjusted his glasses, looking at the machine, then at Matteo. "This," he said, voice trembling slightly, "is the most stable energy prototype we've ever tested." A wave of shocked murmurs filled the room. "And if your team is ready," the investor continued, "we'll not only fund the next phase, we'll push it worldwide." Maria's hand shot to her mouth. Lucas almost jumped out of his chair. But Matteo remained calm, steady, grounded. He nodded politely. "Thank you." And for a moment, everything felt like a dream, until a voice from the back cut through the celebration. "What about the failure last night?" The room turned. A man stepped forward, one of the engineers who had always doubted Matteo, always challenged him, always quietly dismissed him. The same man who had access. The same man who claimed the machine would never work. The same man who wanted the world to see Matteo fall. He didn't know Matteo had discovered the sabotage. Not yet. He smirked. Machines don't randomly burn through their own safety limits. Something must have been wrong with your design. Care to explain that? The room tensed. Eyes shifted. People waited. But Matteo didn't flinch. He didn't expose him. He didn't retaliate. He didn't weaponize the truth. He simply smiled, calm, quiet, almost gentle. Sometimes, Matteo said, the world tests your creation at the exact moment you doubt yourself the most. He walked toward the machine, placing a hand on its warm surface. But the important part, he continued, is what you choose to do after it breaks. His eyes found the man's, steady but not accusing. You fix it. You improve it. You keep going. Silence followed. And in that silence, the engineer's confidence cracked because he knew Matteo knew, but Matteo wasn't playing his game. He had no interest in revenge. He'd already won, and everyone in the room could feel it. The applause that followed was different. Not just impressed, not just supportive, but deeply moved, because they weren't just clapping for the invention, they were clapping for the inventor. The boy who grew up fixing broken engines became the man who built what others said he never could. The poor mechanic they laughed at became the visionary who changed an industry. The person who started with nothing became the one people now look to for direction. And as the crowd rose to their feet, applauding, cheering, celebrating, Matteo closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought of the garage where he first dreamed, the nights filled with failure, the laughter aimed at him, the bruised knuckles, the hunger, the loneliness, and he whispered inwardly, it was all worth it. The applause washed over him like a warm wave, echoing through the hall, rising to the ceiling, filling every corner of the room. But even as people celebrated around him, Matteo stood still, grounded, humbled, quietly absorbing a moment he once thought he'd never live to see. Maria clasped his shoulder. You did it, Matteo. Lucas hugged him so tightly that the microphones on the stage squeaked. I told you the world would finally see what I saw. For a moment, everything was perfect. Everything made sense. Everything he had fought for, and every scar, every failure, every night spent alone with nothing but stubborn hope had led to this, but fate wasn't done with him yet. Because sometimes the universe delivers one last message to show you why your struggle mattered. As the crowd thinned and the journalists packed up their cameras, a small figure remained in the far corner of the hall. A boy, maybe 14, holding a worn backpack against his chest. His clothes were simple, his hair messy from travel, his shoes dusty. He seemed out of place. Yet strangely determined, Matteo noticed him immediately, because the boy's eyes had the same look his own once did. Curiosity, fear, a quiet hunger to understand the world. Lucas nudged Matteo gently. Someone's waiting for you. Matteo walked toward the boy, each step soft, careful. Hey, he said, kneeling slightly so their eyes met. Did you need something? The boy hesitated, gripping his backpack tightly. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know if I should come today. I don't really belong here. Matteo's heart clenched at those words. He knew that feeling. You're here now, he said, voice warm. That means you belong. The boy swallowed hard. I'm Daniel. Nice to meet you, Daniel, Matteo said. Did you want to see the machine? Daniel shook his head. I came to see you. Matteo blinked, surprised. Me? Daniel nodded, eyes glistening with something fragile. My mom works in a small auto shop, he said. Like you did. We don't have much money, but she always told me stories about people who started from nothing and made something that helped others. His voice cracked just slightly. But every time I wanted to build thing at school, they laughed, said it was stupid, said someone like me would never invent anything. Something inside Mateo shifted, an old wound recognizing its reflection. So I stopped trying, Daniel whispered, until I saw your story online last month. Lucas, watching from a distance, slowly touched his heart. Daniel reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, rough model made of scrap metal and taped wires. Awkward, imperfect, beautiful. I made this, the boy said, voice trembling. I didn't show anyone. I was scared they'd laugh again, but then I saw you. You started the way I started. You didn't have anything either. He held the model out with both hands, like offering something sacred. And when I saw you up there today, I thought, maybe, the boy's voice broke. Maybe people like us can build something real. Mateo felt tears sting his eyes, not from pride, not from triumph, but from recognition of the kid he used to be, standing exactly where Daniel was standing now. Lost, ashamed, trying desperately to protect a fragile dream. He knelt fully now, taking the small model into his hands. It was crude, uneven, wires sticking out everywhere, but it was alive in its own ways, full of imagination and hunger and possibility. It's beautiful, Mateo said softly. Daniel looked up in shock. Really? Mateo nodded. Not because it's perfect, he said, but because you made it when you didn't believe in yourself. That takes more courage than anything I did today. Daniel wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. You think I can get better? Mateo smiled, the kind of smile that carries a lifetime of battles behind it. You don't need to be better, he said. You just need to keep building. The boy exhaled shakily, relief flooding his face. You're the reason I didn't give up, Daniel whispered. Mateo placed the model gently back into the boy's hands. And you, he said, voice full, steady, certain, are the reason everything I went through was worth it. Lucas approached slowly, placing a hand on Daniel's back. Come on, kid, Lucas said with a warm grin. How about a tour? We'll show you everything, even the parts we messed up. Daniel's eyes widened with wonder as he followed Lucas toward the prototype. Mateo stayed where he was for a moment, breathing, reflecting, understanding. He looked around the hall, the lights, the stage, the machine that now hummed quietly in triumph, and he realized changing the industry was impressive, changing someone's future was unforgettable. Later that evening, as the last of the team packed up equipment, Maria approached. You know, she said gently, a lot of great inventors change the world. She glanced toward the hallway where Daniel had run laughing with Lucas, but only a few change a person. Mateo closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that truth settle into him. Then he whispered, not to Maria, not to Lucas, not even to Daniel, but to the younger version of himself, still sitting alone in that dusty garage. You made it. And now, someone else will too.
Thank you for spending your time listening to the entire story I shared. See you in the next video. If you find it helpful or enjoyable, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much.